Welcome to Dolphins Today by Chat Sports. I am Nick Roloff. We have a lot of ESPN trade rumors to discuss. They put out an article with their top 15 trade candidates, and a lot of Miami Dolphins showed up. 4 Dolphins players were on ESPN's 15 trade candidates, but the Miami Dolphins were also listed as potential destinations for 4 other players on this list. So a lot of connecting dots here that we got to talk about. We'll start with Miami's player here, because De'Von Achane, the Dolphins running back, was the number 2 trade candidate on this article, only trailing Brian Thomas Jr. Now, ESPN did only give Achane about a 10% chance to be traded this offseason, but we have to talk about it. The 3 destinations that ESPN mentioned for the Dolphins running back: the Kansas City Chiefs, Houston Texans, and Minnesota Vikings. Now, this should surprise nobody. The Chiefs and Texans are maybe 2 of the most RB-hungry teams out there, especially as they look to contend and take that next step in the Eastern Conference, thinking NBA, AFC. But will the Dolphins actually trade him? I don't think that's going to happen, and we'll talk more about that here in a second. But in case the Dolphins do make a trade, make sure you subscribe and have your notifications turned on so you never miss any Dolphins breaking news. Only 13.7 of you guys have your notifications turned on. Let's change that. But as we look at what Dan Graziano of ESPN said on De'Von Achane, he said that his sense is that they're far more likely to extend De'Von Achane's contract than to listen to trade offers. But in their situation, you answer the phone when it rings. So call any Achane trade a significant long shot that would take an awfully enticing package to get done. And this also shouldn't really surprise anybody, because if you watched our video a couple days ago on Tuesday when we reacted to John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley's press conferences at the Combine, we mentioned that Sully had 3 players in mind for a potential extension this offseason. That being De'Von Achane, the running back entering his final year, Jordan Brooks, the linebacker entering his final year, and Aaron Brewer, the center, entering his final year. Those are the 3 guys that I could see Miami keeping here long term because of how successful they have been in the last couple of seasons with the Miami Dolphins. So I do believe De'Von Achane stays put. I think it's more likely than not the Dolphins extend him. Let's move over to Jaylen Waddle now, because he was the 3rd out of 15 players listed as a potential trade candidate. And similar to De'Von Achane, ESPN only gave the wide receiver a 10% chance of being dealt. I do think a lot of teams will call on Jaylen Waddle. The listed destinations for him were the Pittsburgh Steelers, Kansas City Chiefs, Las Vegas Raiders, and Baltimore Ravens. But I think this list could be up to 10 teams in the NFL. You look at teams like the New England Patriots, like the New York Giants, the Denver Broncos, Atlanta Falcons, San Francisco 49ers, just to name a few that are looking to upgrade their wide receiver unit. The Saints could even be included in there, but I don't know if they would trade a first-round pick for them. Dan Graziano on Jaylen Waddle, saying that my sense is the Dolphins will keep Waddle and see him as a building block, and they'll get calls, no doubt, but it would take a lot for them to deal him. And I think similar to De'Von Achane, it is going to take a crazy offer to get Jaylen Waddle. I think De'Von Achane could be had if a team offered a first-round pick for him. Will a team offer that? I'm not sure. I think Jaylen Waddle could be acquired by a team if someone offered a first and second-round pick, or 2 first-round picks for Waddle. Is that going to happen? No, probably not. But just go back to the trade deadline. Remember, folks, the Dolphins turned down a trade offer for Jaylen Waddle, although it was from a division rival, the Buffalo Bills. It was a first-round pick and a third-round pick. Miami turned that down. Now, that's obviously a different regime that included Mike McDaniel, Champ Kelly, not John Eric Sullivan, Jeff Hafley, but that just shows you that Waddle is valued quite a bit in the NFL, and it would take a first and a second or 2 first-round picks to ultimately move him. And what say you? I think Miami's keeping both Jaylen Waddle and De'Von Achane. I talked about that on that Tuesday edition of Dolphins Today. What say you? Type Y if you agree with me, or type N if you think one of them is traded. A more likely Dolphins trade candidate is safety Minkah Fitzpatrick. He showed up as the 11th trade candidate on ESPN's list, but this time a much higher percentage. ESPN gave it a 65% chance Minkah Fitzpatrick is dealt this offseason. And the two teams that were linked in the article, Buffalo Bills and Dallas Cowboys. Now, the Bills actually is surprising to me to a degree. Not that they don't need a safety, because that position grouping was really rough for them a year ago, but I'm just not sure that Jeff Hafley and John Eric Sullivan, who have talked a lot about knowing your division, being better than your division, if they would make a trade inside the division, unless the Bills came in with a crazy offer, like a second-round pick. But the Dallas Cowboys, they are a very fascinating team that have been linked to Minkah Fitzpatrick all the way back in October before the trade deadline. Now, I've talked about this before, but I would add the Cincinnati Bengals and San Francisco 49ers to the list of potential Minkah Fitzpatrick destinations, because the Bengals are desperately looking to upgrade their secondary and defense to make the playoffs. The Niners are looking to take that next step in the NFC. Their safety room last year was not great. They don't have a lot on their depth chart there. I think Minkah could easily go to one of those teams. We got more on Minkah coming up here in a second. But today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. I know no football here, but we do have a lot of basketball, baseball, hockey, golf every single day. And if you want to get on the action, well, guess what? You can get $50 in lineups right now when you play your first $5. It's so easy to play. You just pick more or less on at least 2 to 6 player stat projections. And if you get those picks right, you could cash in. They have early payouts, so if your players get off to a hot start, you might not have to wait till the game finishes to ultimately cash out. I've got an entry for the season in baseball. More on Juan Soto, home runs. Less on Paul Skeens, ERA. And more on Roman Anthony, homers. Those are my 3 picks for this upcoming season in baseball. Join me and the millions of others on Prize Picks. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups when you play your first $5. Links in the description and comments of today's video. Prize Picks. It's good to be right. As we kick it back to ESPN's Dan Graziano on Minkah Fitzpatrick, he said that the Dolphins, with their new coaching staff, it's possible that they'd ultimately trade Minkah, and it's possible they would need to pay down some of the salary. Minkah doesn't have any guaranteed money this season, has a cap hit of about $18 million and a base of $15, but it could ultimately be a player-for-player deal that the Dolphins made last summer when they traded Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey to the Steelers to get Minkah Fitzpatrick. And out of all the trade candidates we'll talk about today, Tua, Achane, Waddle, Minkah, I think Minkah is the only one that will be traded. And I think a trade could actually come to fruition over the next week before free agency, which opens up the tampering period on March 9th. Minkah is still playing at a high level. He was great for Miami last season. He's 29-30. There's no sense to keep him as you're entering a rebuild with him at his age and price point. And yeah, the safety room isn't great, and you definitely have to draft and make improvements here because you only have Dante Trader Jr. as a standard NFL contract under contract right now, as Jordan Colbert and Omar Brown are future/reserve deals. But there will be interest in Minkah Fitzpatrick. I think you could get a potential third-round pick if the market is as robust as I think it could be. And if a third-round pick is on the table for Minkah Fitzpatrick this offseason, Miami would be fools not to accept. Minkah maybe gets traded. Tua Tagovailoa is another one that a lot of people are wondering if he could be on the move. Well, he was listed as the 12th trade candidate this offseason by ESPN, and his percent of being dealt is actually the lowest on the list. Waddle, Achane, 10%, Minkah, 65%. Tua was listed as 5%. Now, the 3 destinations are going to be familiar names: the Arizona Cardinals, Atlanta Falcons, and Minnesota Vikings. But I've mentioned this so frequently, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about it today. I just think talking about a Tua trade right now is a waste of time and irresponsible because it just ain't happening. Until we see different reports and breadcrumbs about potential interest in a Tua trade, it's all just, I think, Miami trying to generate interest through the media to maybe get a trade. Because we know that's Miami's preference. It's not going to happen. I think Tua is ultimately released. Post-June 1 designation, $67 million dead cap hit, and you move from there and move off of Tua and just call it there. Who is the top Dolphins trade candidate? We talked about Waddle, Achane, Tua, and Minkah Fitzpatrick. Which player is the most likely to be dealt. How about some players that Miami could go out and target on the trade market? In this article, there were 4 Dolphins players listed as candidates, and the Dolphins were listed as suitors and destinations for 4. 3 being quarterbacks, Kyler Murray, Spencer Rattler, Tanner McKee. 1 corner in Green Bay last year, Nate Hobbs. And you see there, Kyler Murray's similar to Tua, 5%. He's not going to get traded. If he gets moved, it's going to be a release like Tua. Tanner McKee was listed at 20%. You see Spencer Rattler at a 70% to get traded. Nate Hobbs at 50%. But I want to focus in on Spencer Rattler, who's the highest player percent to get traded here and could be a interesting candidate for Miami. Well, Ben Solak over at ESPN said Rattler excelled as more of a quick distribution point guard last season, but he also showed good creation ability on longer movement dropbacks. He could fight and easily beat out a free agent veteran in training camp for a rebuilding team. And I read that, I see that. I watched Rattler a year ago before he got replaced by Tyler Shuck and then his rookie season. And I'm wondering, I was like, all right, a Quinn Ewers, Spencer Rattler QB battle in training camp could be very fascinating. He's got 2 years left on a rookie contract, so it's not like you trade for him and it's either going to be a 1-year backup or not. You could have him here in 2026 and 2027 making $2 million because he was a day 3 pick. And he does have a lot of starting experience. Across his first 2 seasons in the league, he started 14 games. Now, the Saints have been one of the worst teams in football, so the record isn't very pretty, being 1-13. And the raw numbers ain't that good as well. He's a little bit of a smaller stature quarterback, has a good strong arm, quick release. He has been very inconsistent, which shouldn't be that surprising as a day 3 pick, right? He has had a lot of good moments. He's had a lot of bad moments. To me, I think it's an intriguing name to monitor for Miami. And if he gets traded, you wonder if the Dolphins could be interested there and at least call on the former South Carolina quarterback. But you have to choose your spots incredibly carefully when you're making trades because you have to balance, all right, what is worth a trade here? Because I don't want to get rid of draft picks. We need those picks to get cheap young guys. But also, is Spencer Rattler, if you trade a 5th-round pick for him, better than any of the quarterbacks you could draft in the 5th round this year, right? Like a Drew Aller or a Garrett Nussmeier. Like, that's how you have to balance it. And you have to also balance the value. Like, is Rattler worth a 5th? Is he going to go for a 4th or maybe even a 3rd? That's certainly way too high of a price point. Those are the things that John Eric Sullivan would ultimately have to kind of analyze, ask, and answer himself. And if the Dolphins do make any trades, like we mentioned, we'll have you covered with a video on the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss any Dolphins news.